Hi, my name is Dori Baker, and I am here this weekend at the invitation of the Wesley Center, specifically their campus ministry grant that's exploring vocation. And I was asked to come and help a group of women think about meaning and purpose, specifically through their lived experience, like through the stories of their own lives. And there was one more layer to what I was asked to do, which was to specifically focus on how do we create an environment that welcomes everyone's stories. So if we come from a white middle class context and we know what purpose looks like because we're following what our mothers and our grandmothers thought of as purpose, or what our peers think of as purpose, what does it look like to broaden that and to think about mission, our personal mission, our purpose, our vision for who we are and who God is calling us to be in a slightly larger worldview. And then what does that look like to kind of create a anticipation for an even larger worldview? And we're just about the work here. We are about the work here of making more expansive our images of who God is and who God calls us to be by listening deeply to the stories of people who may or may not look like us. So I've been privileged for the last 10 years of getting to do the work that I do in a context in which the voices of brown and black people are valued and heard. And that milieu has been a gift for me, and so this is a way that I get to expand that gift to my community and kind of bridge some worlds that don't all have the opportunity. Everybody doesn't have the opportunity to be in places surrounded by folks who don't look like them. That's been my privilege and my gift, and so I was invited here to kind of expand that gift to a larger group of people. There are lots of different ways to use the Christian story to drive our lives. And a predominant story has been about having a personal relationship with Jesus. And that's a perfectly valid story and a good story and a real story. And another way to use the Christian story, or another way to apply the Christian story to our lives, is to think about who that Jesus was. He was a young adult, person of color, from the Middle East. He was a child of immigrants. He lived most of his life, or at least most of his stories, happened outside the four walls of any institution, in the fields where food was being grown, by rivers and lakes. He was a person who lived in an empire that was damaging to those at the lowest socioeconomic level, and he got all of that. And the way he approached his ministry was to tell stories that awakened something in people, that helped them see a different way of living. And so I like to focus on Jesus' life and ministry, and I like to focus on the way he lived in the world. And someone here yesterday reminded me that the Christian story is rich with fertile soil from which we can tell a better story about what it means to be human. The only story about, one of the predominant stories we hear about being human is we've got to be successful. We've got to have that GPA. We've got to be competing on a sports team, and if we're competing, it's got to be the best. And we're not hearing as many stories about what does it look like when we fall down? What does it look like if we suffer from anxiety or depression? What does it look like to be surrounded by a community that supports us when we're not the all-star champion, but we're just normal, we're ordinary? Because most of us fall into the category of normal, ordinary, but we're capable of extraordinary things when we're surrounded by the right kind of caring community. So I think that's part of what we are focusing on as we listen here in this place to people's stories, and as we become the kind of followers who value every single human life, no matter what it looks like, no matter what kind of brains in between these two ears, no matter which ways we wild and courageous and brave ways we live out our humanity in living color. All of that is honored and valued and seen as worthy, deeply, deeply worthy in this place that we've been creating this weekend, and hopefully in what Wesley stands for on this corner of campus. A welcoming and hospitable environment where everybody matters. So one of the opportunities this weekend was to plunge into different people's stories using a method called girlfriend theology. And it was a beautiful encounter this morning, one of my favorite encounters with girlfriend theology ever, and I've been doing this for over 20 years. The storyteller was a young woman of Native American descent who happens to be the adopted daughter of a white family. And she told a story about wanting to get a tattoo that was calling to her heart. And it was the tattoo of a snake, which she interpreted as a symbol of rebirth and protection. But it was a little bit problematic for her parents, who were raised in a more conservative Christian understanding of snakes as evil, right? The source of all evil in the book of Genesis, when Adam and Eve, Eve took the apple from a snake. But this young woman told the story of wanting to expand her understanding of her native tradition, and in that native tradition there's a great appreciation of the snake. So the story was about that, and she told her story, and then we entered into this careful process of holding her story and wondering where God might be in that story for us today. It went to this beautiful place where probably at least 20 people in the room talked about the significance of tattoos for their culture. Tattoos are a spiritual practice that allows the women in the room today to name significant parts of their journey, to remind themselves of ways that their lives have been changed by a particular relationship or a particular landmark. One woman told the story of every time she hikes and gets to the summit, she centers herself by looking at her tattoos and reminding herself who she is. And so my mind was just so gifted and opened by this really frank conversation about how young women today have taken this thing, tattoos, and created it as a form of self-expression and voice, which is really very deeply tied to their understanding of themselves as spiritual beings in a body, as an embodied person with a really important message to share and a unique message to share for the world.